everybody. Welcome back. I'm Susan Lindner, your host of the Innovation Storyteller Show, where we get underneath the really big innovations that incredible people are working on, and we find out the stories that they tell to get their big ideas to the finish line. So I'm very excited today because number one, women in innovation are always exciting. And number two, we're going to go a little bit, not just backwards in hearing the innovations that my guest has worked on in the past, but also we're going to be talking today about setting a new future in standards around innovation, how we learn about them, how we teach about them, the processes that we put in place for innovation management in order to reduce risk, to think about how we convey these big ideas. And of course, from my perspective, having a unified way of telling stories about the innovation that we're working on. So this management process is going to be a big part of what we're going to be focusing on today. So please meet my incredible guest, Joanne Hyland, who is the president of the rInnovation Group, a boutique consulting company specializing in strategic innovation. As an ISBM fellow and Innovation Body of Knowledge Special Interest Group co-leader, she is committed to advancing the profession of innovation management. She is an accomplished author and an industry thought leader and teaches in executive education programs. She has decades of experience in leading and implementing innovation strategies and management systems in industry roles and through consultancy services. Her most recent book, Changing the Dynamics and Impact of Innovation Management, a Systems Approach, and the ISO Standard, was published in October 2022. And we're going to include links to the Joanne's books in the show notes as well. So Joanne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Susan. Delighted to be with you.
So, Joanne, you've been in the innovation space for a good long time. How did you get there?
Yeah, well, I hate to admit it's been over 40 years now that I've been in the business world.
We're going to cut you open like a tree and count all the innovation rings inside of you. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, I hope not. But, I think a lot of people that are in innovation, and it was interesting, I was just on a call with a potential client yesterday, start in marketing. So I started in marketing, and my degree was in marketing. And I got out of school and went into the telecommunications industry, working for Bell Canada. And it was at that time that I wrote the first ever marketing plan, because in that world at the time, marketing wasn't known. It was sales or it was customer service. It was nothing about marketing whatsoever. And marketing, that was back in sort of the early 80s. Marketing was not well defined the way it is now. And I believe, based on my experiences over the years, is that marketing has now matured and innovation management is on the same path towards achieving a similar level of maturity.
This path to innovation through marketing is one that I took as well. And I think it's amazing as a storyteller, right? It forced me to be able to communicate a breakthrough idea back in Internet 1.0, right? So 1998 on my end, and figure out how to take very complex ideas, very things that people hadn't seen before, and then find interesting ways of communicating on my end to the press. That was my job, but also to creating messaging that would interact with potential buyers and partners, venture capital firms, private equity firms, right? And adapting that marketing side of the discussion to really breakthrough technology at the time. So you start off in marketing, and then how do you find your way to actually working on innovation itself? Like what's your first step?
Okay, well, in the 80s, we weren't using the term innovation. It wasn't really something that was top of mind for people, but we were doing, in the services industry, we were doing service development. So what really happened was learning how to be a bridge between technology and what the market really needed. Now, you have to remember, back in the 80s, we were a monopoly, so we had no competition, but we were still very focused on bringing out very innovative technologies. And the first big project that I worked on was to actually take calling card services and 800 services and convert them from analog to digital technology. So we created digital switches, we created databases that needed to support those kinds of services, and That was done across the country in Canada. We had I was leading a core team of about 200 people, and we probably had about 1,000 people across the country that were involved in making this happen. This was like a huge investment in order to move from the analog to the digital age. And that required obviously being very innovative. It required being very creative. It also required, as you were just mentioning, Susan, the ability to help people to see what is possible, because a lot of people felt that we couldn't do it. They felt that we couldn't get out of that analog world and move into the digital world. And so that was sort of the key, the very first project that I was involved in, where we had some meaningful impact, and went on obviously to be able to offer all kinds of features on 800 service and make calling card far more secure, and many other dimensions that came along with that.
It's funny because especially when you're working on something that's so utilitarian, right? When we're working on telecom, we don't necessarily think of it as this breakthrough, but it was the foundation for all things that were to come, right? It was the foundation for the internet. It was the backbone of connecting all these kind of last mile systems. It was a transition with switches, to your point, to fiber optics. Like, this is where all these technologies got tested. And we think about our iPhones as being this beautiful wireless device that doesn't have any, that has no connection to the telecom world almost anymore. And yet Verizon and T-Mobile and what have you are still the backbone of our technology. I mean, it's the epicenter of our technology still.
Yeah, and actually a lot of companies in more recent years have been going through digitalization. And I look upon it and think, well, we did that decades ago. And of course, the technology has advanced a lot, but the principles still remain the same. And it's very easy for me to step into almost any industry and say, okay, these are the things that you need to be thinking about as you digitalize or as you bring in your new technologies today. Because as you pointed out, the telecom really was the background and continues to be the background. And a couple of interesting stories, because this is about innovation storytellers. One was my first product that I worked on was calling card services before we got into this sort of major innovation path. And at the time, we were working very closely with AT&T in the US. And AT&T decided to change the security on their calling cards to go to more of a credit card format. And the guy who was leading this in Canada decided that we would keep our old type of what was called an RAO check digit type format. And all of a sudden, as AT&T converted to a more secure card, the next thing you know, we had $100 million worth of fraud coming in on the Canadian cards. It was so significant that there were people in Harlem in New York that were at phone booths using these cards to call all over the world, literally. But they were afraid to shut down the telephone booths for fear of a riot at the time. So we had to actually turn our whole card system around and reissue 1 million cards within a couple of months. We had to drop those cards at the Christmas time period where, in those years, there was a lot of mail happening. And I even had to fly down to New York to test the card in a card reader, because we didn't even have the card readers available in the US yet. So that is, I think, a really interesting example of how we had to be really creative, we had to be very innovative, and we had to execute extremely quickly with brand new technology. And then the other story you mentioned about sort of the internet and so forth, I was part of the regional Bell operating companies. It was called the New Business sort of organization. And we'd all get together with the RBOX in Canada every 4 or 5 months or so. And we would talk about what was happening in terms of trends that we needed to be aware of as being people involved in innovation. And Nick Ciancio from Pac Bell at the time came to one of our meetings. He said, I have uncovered the company that is going to unleash the internet. And we all got really excited, and we started to talk about, well, what is this company? And And of course, the company was Netscape. And so we're all really interested in what's going on. So everybody runs back to their respective companies. And I said, look, at the time we had a long distance service and we had a data service. Those were our two equivalent business units. And I said, this is going to change our business. we have to do something about it. We have to get ready for it. And I presented to our board at the time. And the answer I got back from the board was that the only thing the internet could possibly do to our business would be to displace some of our international toll traffic, which was our premium service, long distance, international international telecom, which we were making a lot of money in. So they thought that could be vulnerable, but they didn't think the rest of the business could be vulnerable at all. So that was kind of being an innovator. I started to learn that people just don't see the potential. They don't see the vision. They don't see what could possibly happen. And even despite good communication and trying to lay it out, a lot of people just are very comfortable with the status quo and are resistant to change because they're just not comfortable with that.
It's amazing, right? I mean, it's part of human nature almost, right? To be stuck in this way, right? Of clinging to the status quo. We really fear the change, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And I think you have to be wired for change. I know for me, I would get very bored with the status quo. And that's why I've always been involved in roles where it was kind of doing the first of something, because I had the opportunity to do so. And I didn't plan out my career or anything like that. It just sort of happened through the various steps I took along the way and the people I met and the great teams that I had along the way to be able to make that happen. But I saw a lot of people that were really comfortable in these roles, and I saw other people that they just were not. And I think it's about transformation. It's about change management. It's about seeing the future. It's about embracing the possibilities. It's about learning. It's about being comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. And a lot of people would be really uncomfortable hearing those kinds of words. But that's why I think that there's a certain part of us that are wired for this. And I know other people just are better off in other roles that are also equally important and need to have incredible impact as well.
Yeah. So I know as leader of a consulting firm, specifically in innovation, and tell us again, like, so it wasn't called innovation back in the day. It was called what?
Well, we called it service development. Okay.
Service
So,
development.
okay. Or product development, but we were introducing services. So we called it service development.
Yeah. And then what followed that?
Then for me, anyway, I got involved in international work, and we got involved in an international alliance. And we introduced with actually Newbridge, technologies. We introduced the first global managed network in the world. So we set up dedicated T1, E1 pipes, data pipes, and we created a network where that was able to be globally managed, and it was being managed actually from Ottawa in Canada. And that was, again, something that was sort of new, never done before. We had to negotiate with these large international carriers. We had 12 countries involved to get them to free up their capacity, offer data for free. And we did it for the financial community. So it was called the Financial Network Alliance. And we were able to demonstrate that you can actually manage a global network. And at the time, just to kind of give people an idea, we were talking about 56K and 64K in terms of bandwidth. So, which is nothing today, but those were huge in terms of the bandwidth at the time. So that was the International Alliance sort of propelled me then on into a new business opportunities role. And so then we started, and that was about the time I told you the story about being involved with the regional Bell operating companies. That was about the time when we were looking at things like the internet. We were looking at artificial intelligence. We were looking at virtual reality. All of what's sort of come into fruition now in more recent years. But at that time, we were a new business opportunities team. And I learned very quickly that you can come up with all of these great opportunities, but if you have no ability to follow through with them, they don't go anywhere because your organizations are not set up to be able to deal with these new types of opportunities that are in place. And that is equally relevant today. There's many companies that get a lot of great ideas going or great technologies they have that are out there, and they just can't get them out to market because they just don't know how.
So watching this progression, what I'm hearing you say is that innovation was just incorporated into the way we do business, but it was it was dependent on a business need arising, right? There may be some forward-looking thought about where is the business going to be in 5, 10 years, or what is a global coalition that we need to build in order to take that next step, but not a real academic means of looking at how innovation arises or should be managed. Even the process of understanding innovation management has shifted over time. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And I would say that innovation came as the term more out of the academic ranks.
Ah,
And I only really saw it sort of becoming more used within industry in about the mid-90s. We started to talk more about incremental innovation. We started to talk more about breakthrough innovation or radical innovation. Interestingly, we backed off of the use of radical innovation because it was compared too much or paralleled too much with the radical 60s. So there's a lot of people in the US that didn't want to hear the term radical innovation. But Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute was doing research, and at the time it was called radical innovation. And I had since transitioned from sort of the Bell Canada family of companies and moved on to Nortel Networks. And I was I was the first person, so basically had to found the internal venturing group. And our mission was to actually invest in our technology that was being, developed within Nortel in the labs. So I was actually in an R&D function, but we were actually investing in these technologies and looking to create businesses around them. So we had a portfolio that eventually grew to 12 internal startups. Some of them ended up in our divisions. In fact, the gateway was developed from our team to be able to communicate between the internet protocol and the plain old telephone network. So it was really the bridge to be able to get into the internet protocol world. We also came up with middleware technology that ended up in our divisions as well. And we turned it from obviously a technology into a business opportunity that then went on into the market or became part of a component of a broader solution that needed to be developed in the market, such as you mentioned earlier, the optical switching and the optical capabilities that we needed to have. And that at that time with Rensselaer, they started studying what we were doing. They studied one of our ventures. It was called NetActive at the time. And it was could you actually rent software over the internet? So that was the idea. And the problem at the time, it was not successful, but it was not because it wasn't a great idea, because we now know that happens by common course every day. The idea was, though, the bandwidth wasn't there. We just didn't have the capacity to support it. So we looked at other ways of using CDs and so forth. But eventually that was a startup that was not successful. But Rensselaer study that particular venture, and in the process started studying how we were organizing and structuring for innovation within the portfolio. And the first phase of the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute work resulted in the book Radical Innovation. And then the second phase was actually led because of what they saw, that what we were doing and also what DuPont was doing at the time. And that was about how do you build a capability for breakthrough innovation. And it was really much more getting to a systems level and starting to think about this as a system rather than just a project. And the reason why that research became so critical was because you can have these projects working differently. And in breakthrough innovation, there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a way to identify that uncertainty and to reduce it through learning plans and so forth. But if you don't have the rest of the organization aligned to understand that these projects need to be handled differently, then they're bound to fail. And that's why the second phase became about, okay, we know these projects have to work differently, but how can we enable them to work differently? And that's where the second phase of the research came into being. And that's also when the rInnovation group, by the way, got founded. It was founded in 2001, and it was founded because of the research from RPI and a lot of companies realizing that they needed to handle innovation in a different way. And that's when innovation as a term started to become far more common and far more used, and making the distinctions with the continuum of innovation from incremental, which is really more new product development, all the way through to more breakthrough innovation when you're dealing with technologies and new markets and so forth.
And I think the rise of the internet boom and the ethos around innovation in different companies really contributed beyond our own little companies that we were working in. There was something, the advent of Google, and that it tasked every employee, or it tasked, but offered them the opportunity to say, hey, if you see something cool, we're going to put money toward it. And you, individual employee, can go and seek that thing out and make something better, right? Or that there suddenly started springing up these kind of moonshot labs. Different companies were trying out all different kinds of models with incubators, accelerators, venture groups, right? That suddenly every large company had its own venture arm. And even old companies like GE, right? One of the oldest companies in America had its own GE Capital, and they were looking to invest in companies. They were spinning out businesses from their own shops and trying to sell those as internet startups, right? And it was this ongoing process of, it was everyone can innovate was part of the conversation, certainly. But to your point, no real standardization about how we manage innovation.
Right.
And from beginning, middle, and end. And there's Clay Christensen, for those of you who don't know, one of the great thinkers in innovation in our modern time. He's no longer with us, but begin to set up some academic discussion. RPI was another hub, certainly, of where innovative thinking was coming from. And we had this horizon thinking, right? All these different ways of putting different models into time horizons or different categories of products. And suddenly every chief innovation officer I knew was creating a portfolio of innovation, right? And that's how we looked at things. I was just at Corning a couple of weeks ago, and the conversation was, in the portfolio, there is stuff we're adding on to what's already here, stuff we're trying out that is product adjacent. And then we always leave a little extra cash in the budget for moonshots, things that could really change the focus of the organization 20 years from now. And then I always heard about the petty cash that's kind of left off to one side of things that haven't actually gotten to work yet, but we know they could if we just found the right market application, or that we found the right go-to strategy, or we found the right iteration of the product, maybe in a different material form. Okay, it's not working as a spray, but maybe it's working as a liquid, or maybe it's working as a solid or a gas or something, right? But we know we have some kind of gold sitting here. We just haven't figured out the product market fit yet for it. So you're working now on a global standard around innovation management. Tell us how this came to be and what it is, and then we'll get into some of the questions about how we wind up doing this around the world.
Okay, maybe though first, if I may, just like to go back a little bit on a few of the things that you said to get to the standardization, because there were different schools of thoughts happening probably in like the late 1999 through to early 2000s, and about the time that the Innovators Dilemma came out with Clay Christensen. And there was one school of thought that you, as a large established organization such as a GE or Corning or whatever, you cannot do this inside. You have to put it out and let the market forces make it happen. And then there was another school of thought, which was the one that RPI and I happened to share, is that you can do it inside, but you have to know how to do it inside the organization. Okay, and that goes now sort of into the standard side. And the challenge has been that these programs have come and go. Like the average life expectancy is often 3, 4, 5 years. And I was involved at MIT in the early 2000s. We had a corporate venturing consortium, and one of the guys from Boeing at the time tracking all of the programs, and he said 4 years kind of thing. And everyone was tracking programs, and it's changed a lot now. Like there's more companies that are committed to this as a sustainable model, not a model that comes and goes. But it was often from 2000, and especially during the financial crisis, a lot of companies would shut down their innovation programs, only to a few years later say, oh, we need to do this but they lost all the know-how. They lost the people because they get rid of the people in the process. They don't look at it as a core competence in the organization. They don't consider it like just as much as you wouldn't get rid of all your engineers, or you wouldn't get rid of all your marketing people, or you wouldn't get rid of all your finance people or your operations people. Why would you completely shut down a program and get rid of all of your innovation know-how? And that's what was going on over and over again. So there were these cycles of, yes, we need it. No, we don't. Yes, we need it. No, we don't. And so the know-how was not there. So the standards world is really coming in to say, this is a capability. This is an innovation capability. It's something that companies need to build. And it starts with the call to action and initiation. Then you learn as you put in this management system, which I'll describe a little bit more in just a second. And then you evolve it once you've learned. And then once you've done the evolution, you get to a point where you figure out how you can sustain it over the long run. Now, it doesn't mean it looks the same. It doesn't mean you have the same people all the time. It doesn't mean you have the same investment level all the time, but at least you are building a capability that can last, that can stand the test of time. And so the standard is really about understanding the dynamics of innovation. So first, let's kind of settle on the language. We're not trying to standardize the innovations themselves. So the opportunities and the ideas that come in, and then the output that happens in terms of products, services, business models, process type improvements, whatever it happens to be, that's not the focus. The focus is on how do we go about doing this? How do we make them successful? So it's about how do we enable it? So innovations are the starting point to the end point. Innovation management is the process that helps to make that happen. The innovation management system is actually all of the elements that are important in an organization to be successful. So what is the context of the organization? What is its capacity? Understanding what the leadership commitment is and how much are they going to be involved in helping to enable this? What is the culture? Is it supportive or conducive for innovation? What are the objectives? How do we go about planning for this? What kind of support do we need in terms of resources, whether that be people, finance, partners, etc.? And then what are the different kinds of innovation processes that we need to be able to deal with more incremental innovation, which is typically very successful through a phase gate or stage gated type of process. But if you take something of high uncertainty and you try to put it through that, it won't work. And you'll end up incrementalizing what could become the future game changer for a company. And then how do you go about evaluating it and improving it over time? So this system is really this holistic approach. The standard is about the innovation management system. It's not about trying to take away the creativity, or it's not about trying to curtail innovation in any way. It's about how do we enable it. And so these cycles that we've had over the last couple of decades have been because people don't know how to really manage innovation in a way where it can actually be successful. And so the standard, and our hope is that now that we've gone from the innovation management system, we had one standard that came out in 2019, which was guidance. The one that's coming out in September, and we're hoping September 8th is the date for it, and because it's in the final stages of publication right now, is really about a requirement standard. So what that means is the same as 9001 for quality. It's really to say, these are the requirements that you need to live up to in order to be able to get certified. Now, those requirements are not like, okay, these are the elements that need to go into your innovation strategy. It's about, do you have an innovation strategy? And what is it? Have you documented it? It's not about telling companies the details. Like, of course, you can get into implementation after you put the system in place, and you can get into the details. Like what we do in our company, we help organizations to develop their strategies and implement them. But this is really focused around what are the critical success factors that organizations need to be considering in order to be successful. And when we make the case for this, we start with why standards, and then we start with why an innovation management system, and then we get to the point of why certification. So it's really about putting together the right kind of package to help guide companies in terms of how they can be successful and not go through these cycles where they shut things down.
Yeah, because you and I both know the average lifespan of a chief innovation officer is about 22 months.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's almost a problem to have the title Chief Innovation Officer.
It's true. And I feel like so many people view innovation also as art, right? It's like art and science. Like when someone unveils a new marketing campaign, back to the beginning of our conversation, it's so subjective, right? And as a result, I think people hear the word innovation, and that in itself is subjective. We're not
Yeah.
operating from the same vocabulary, and i.e. the same expectation level. Hearts are going to get broken on both sides of the boardroom table, because we had an expectation that we hired a chief innovation officer, you should be making the next iPhone, versus understanding what's actually possible and what the culture allows and all of these other pieces. Where can we find early wins that give people trust and understanding of what's coming next? But the standard, having a universal standard, would eliminate so much of the miscommunication, which is my side of the aisle, right? Is getting the communications around innovation right. And it's because we're starting with such different vocabulary and understanding vocabulary.
Right. Well, one of the other parts is getting the vocabulary in place. So there's another part of it's not within the innovation management system standard, but there's another one which is called it's numbered 56,000, which is about the fundamentals and terminology. And as with you, I've been in so many discussions with executives in companies that you know that they don't have a good understanding of what innovation is really all about. There's so many CEOs that ask for innovation, but they don't know what they're asking for.
Right.
And it just sets the teams up for failure because of the fact that the expectations are misaligned and the KPIs are misaligned. If you're going after incremental innovation, well then yeah, you can probably get some quick wins. If you're going after breakthrough innovation, it's going to take longer, because we know it takes longer to do the learning, reduce the uncertainty, and kind of move it forward in a way. And a lot of times companies don't realize that there needs to be a different approach. And there needs to be different KPIs. And we just worked with a company in Germany about 3-4 months ago. They want growth, they want long-term innovation, they want transformational innovation, but all their KPIs are about revenue and EBIT. So they're just shutting down the potential. And now they're going back to their board. In fact, they're going back to the board in about a week and a half to say, look, we got to change this. And when it's based on the recommendations that we've made, that they realize that they're never going to get to transformational innovation with the way they're structured. And they're doing pretty well with their incremental work, and they're optimizing in areas where they need to do, where their business is more commoditized. But there's other parts of their business that really need to grow, and they're not going to grow if they continue doing things the way they've been doing them. And then we talked before about Moen and working, because a lot of the US audience would know Moen. And I think
the fixture, right?
Yeah, the taps and faucets, as we say in the US, and shower heads. And they started there, and they called themselves fashion plumbers because they felt that they had a little bit of fashion design into their plumbing fixtures. But what they realized is that their whole company was founded on the actual founder himself, Al Moen, and that they weren't getting breakthroughs anymore, and they didn't know how to go about it. They wanted breakthrough innovation, they needed growth, but they didn't know what to do. So at the time, Professor Gina O'Connor and I went in and we did an assessment. And we said, okay, we looked at sort of what was working, what's not working, where do you need to go to next? And this was back in 2007. And Gina and I were pulling together after having conducted a number of interviews, looking at all kinds of documentation, et cetera, et cetera. And we looked at each other and we said, we're not sure that this company really knows what they're asking for and whether they can even do it. So we presented back to the executive committee. And by the way, this is a published case, so I'm not speaking out of school here.
Yeah.
And we presented back to the executive committee and we said, you know what? If you aren't really committed to this, don't even bother. We're not sure that you have the capacity. We're not sure you're in it for the long term. You would be wasting your time, you'd be wasting your money and so forth. So we said, we're not seeing a path here. So what do you think you can do about it? And unbeknownst to us, it was actually the chief operating officer and the chief financial officer, which are normally the two that are not known to support innovation. They said, we can do this. And the chief financial officer said, we're going to start running this as a portfolio of options. You mentioned the portfolio earlier.
Right.
And the chief operating officer said, yeah, and this will really help us fulfill our corporate vision. We'll link our innovation strategy with our corporate strategy, and it'll be part of our vision of enjoying water wisely. And so they rallied around it, and Moen's been now at this for 15 years. And they've gone from being basically in the fashion plumbing business into a smart water technology company. They're into irrigation systems. They have spas, they do leak detection, they do all kinds of things. So inside, outside the home, all kinds of areas that are related to water. And you would have never thought that a company like a Moen would have been able to do that, but they did. And they did that because they became very committed to following through on doing this, but doing it in a systematic way where they actually followed an innovation management system. They were one of the very early companies using an innovation management system, because even though the standard's coming out now, we've been designing and implementing innovation management systems since about 2004. So we've seen the progression over time.
So what do you say to companies, like, how do you doing this on a global scale, right? You're not doing this alone, John. You have many other partner groups, right, that are working on creating these standards and thinking through the cultural issues, the international issues, right, around this.
And writing standards is not easy. I'm not sure if anyone that's listening has ever been involved in the standards world, but it's basically it's like being at the UN, and it's never going to be ideal. So when you're working together, you're always looking for the consensus. It's always driven by consensus. So every company or country or expert, as we call them, people that are involved, bring their perspectives to the table, and then we use the best to be able to create the standard. So it's actually in working with all of these over 50 countries were involved in actually developing the innovation management system. We get really interesting perspectives of how does it get done in Japan, for example, or how is it done in Europe, or how is it done in South America, or what happens in Malaysia, or even China's a part of this. So what's going on in China? So we get all of these various perspectives together, and we go through, everyone submits comments, and then you go through the comments on the basis of what's in the text. And then you come to an agreement as to what the text will be. And in the world of innovation management, for those that are, familiar with it, there's a lot of people from the quality world or from the standards world that don't really understand the differences with innovation management. So a large part of the negotiation that happens when we're drafting these standards is to make sure that the innovation management practice is actually highlighted in the standards to show what the differences are. So it's not about, for example, we talked about an innovation strategy before. It's not about a corporate strategy being developed. It's about an innovation strategy. So a corporate strategy a lot of times is based on what you already know. Your business units provide information. You look to the future. You say, okay, this is what we're going to do in the next couple of years. And you've got your corporate strategy. And innovation strategy is really cast from the future, and you backcast. It's based on possibilities. It's not based on probabilities. So it's set up in a very different way, and you need an innovation intent. So these kinds of terms are also included in the innovation management standard so that people can see the differences for innovation management as a discipline versus quality or project management or environment or a whole host of other areas.
So how do people get their hands on the standard? I know it's still simmering, right? Or how do you recommend that other listeners here who are working in innovation every day, how do they get their hands on these standards?
Okay, so many other standards are already available. So there are standards, as I mentioned. There's the Innovation Management System Guidance Standard. There's another one that I worked on about managing opportunities and ideas in the front end of innovation. There's one on partnerships. There's another one on intellectual property management. So there's a host in the family. There's one on measurements that just came out in April. The best place to go is to go to the ISO website and look up under innovation management, and then you'll find a whole bunch of the various standards that have been published would be listed there, and you can buy them off of the ISO site, and they run around 100 to 125 US dollars or so. And it really describes sort of what are the steps for any of these particular topics within the innovation management family. And then the one that we've been talking about, the requirement standard, well, and like I said earlier, we're hoping it'll be published in September, and that it will also be available. If anyone that is listening is involved in the standards world themselves, then they can actually go to their various mirror committees. So for example, I'm an expert representing Canada. So we have a mirror committee in Canada, and I also then work at the international level, helping to draft these standards. So each of the various organizations in country also have the standards available for sale.
Fantastic. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you 3 questions that I ask every guest on the show,
Okay.
which is, what do you believe is the greatest innovation of all time?
I always struggle with that because I've been asked that before. And I think I'm also a little bit biased, but I really believe it comes from the time when we were able to bring the computing world and the telecom together and really create the communications. Because as we discussed earlier, I think that was sort of the beginning of everything else. And in the absence of that happening, I don't think we would have what we have today in terms of, some people say the iPhone, which I think is great, by the way. I had one of the very early versions of that as well, but I think it's really at an industry level, the innovation that happened.
Yeah. It's the difference between a Palm Pilot and an iPhone.
Right, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And for those of you who don't know what a Palm Pilot is, please look it up. So
Long time ago.
if you had an opportunity to join any innovation team in history, which innovation team would you join?
I think I would have liked to have been a part of Google in its early days.
Hmm.
Yeah, and again, it's that bias. I think that having the search technology, having been involved in one of our ventures at Nortel was neural networks based. So I've always been fascinated with artificial intelligence as well. And I think Google in its early days with the search technology was really kind of on the forefront of really revolutionizing what we have today.
Yeah. And what's something that annoys you or you wish someone would innovate or invent that doesn't exist today? Something that would bring you great joy or alleviate great misery.
I think right now we have far too many apps.
Ugh.
And I think if someone could crack that sort of solution, and I think it's probably coming with AI, but being able to not have to be sort of navigating through all of these apps all the time and trying to find everything, and being able to bring it all together in a way where it's just very intuitive, very conscious, and something that it's just one step to be able to make it all happen.
Ugh, I love that. We need like an app Hoover on
Yeah.
app
Yes.
aggregator. Yeah, for our phones. That's true. And to rule out the redundancies. One of my favorite new apps is Rocket Money, which finds all the duplicate subscriptions that I have, you know,
Oh,
and rules those out and cancels them for me, and even renegotiates my bill if it's getting too high. Like, these are the things that I just find joyous in the app world. And yes, somehow being able to navigate all of these would be great. Joanne Hyland, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people find more about you, about your books, about the standards? Where should we send them?
okay. So we have our website, rInnovationgroup.com. So there's information there. I'd be happy to, I'm also available on LinkedIn. So probably that would be one of the best places to find me. And also, Susan, please feel free. You can provide my email, whatever, my phone number for WhatsApp. So I'm on WhatsApp a lot. So that's kind of whatever you think would be best for people to reach me.
You are a global girl. Okay. Joanne, thank you so much for joining me on the Innovation Storyteller Show today. Keep on listening and check out these standards. It's where all of us are going in the future. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Susan. It was a pleasure.